All right. So, what's your name?
My name is David Smith, and I'm a nobody.
What do you do?
Well, I'm currently semi-retired teacher for many, many years. Still write music. Still love playing music. It's a little bit more limited to than what once was. I don't do as many live gigs as I used to, but I focus a lot on writing and doing these demos that no one cares about or ever want to listen to. And I put them up on YouTube. And that's kind of my whole life now. It's sort of what I do.
Yeah. Where do you go to school?
I graduated from the University of Maryland, music education. Oh, 72. And then subsequently, I moved to LA with my fusion band. By the way, kids, if you ever think you're going to make money moving to Los Angeles playing in a fusion band, you might want to sit down and rethink that. Wasn't the smartest move.
How long did that last?
I think we were rejected by every major label within the first 3 or 4 months we were out there.
At least you were getting in front of the labels.
Well, I guess I think if you were to contact any of them now, all those people are probably dead that were that were involved in those. Yeah, that's an interesting story, though. We were, for some reason, one of our players, a bass player, Arnie Frager, um, hooked up with Blackwell. Bumps Blackwell was Little Richard's like producer, personal, whatever. I mean, he had been with Little Richard for a really, really long time, and he came to DC because he heard a tape of us playing somewhere, and he liked it. Now, how an aging black man who has been with Little Richard for 50 some years all of a sudden wants to listen to a fusion band beats me. But we went out there and he actually put us in a studio. He put the money up, put us in the studio. And then we consequently broke up, and I got a job at Los Angeles City College, which I kept for 15 years. And
Yeah. What do you do there?
uh, I was, what did they call that? Adjunct professor of percussion. Now that sounds pretty flamboyant, but when you're adjunct, it just means you don't get tenure and you don't get any medical benefits. That's
Yeah.
that's
So
basically
it's not good. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not.
Not what you want.
It sounds a lot better than it really is.
Yeah. So, what did you teach there? Besides, like you taught percussion, but
Right.
what did
That's
you
where I
actually
met
do?
Luis Conti. Yeah,
Okay.
that's how I met Luis. Luis was a student there. I had a lot of kids come through there that were either actors or they were soon to be really well known people in the music industry. Um, my claim to fame out there, though, was I mean, I did some pretty cool gigs. I played on Apocalypse Now. I did a little tour with the Beach Boys. But the gig that I had for many, many years, it was my moneymaker, was I played with a puppeteer named Waylon Flowers who had a puppet named Madam. And Waylon Flowers and Madam, back in those days, they were huge. I mean, it was like an X-rated puppet show. This old lady puppet would come out on stage and drop the F-bomb and just talk like a drunken sailor. And people loved her. And the primary audience for Waylon and Madam were middle-aged women. Yeah, they would come in busloads in Vegas, Tahoe, and Reno to hear them. The way I got that job was kind of an interesting story because I had done a job at the Songwriters Workshop. Actually,
Where's
it
that?
wasn't a job; it was a presentation in Hollywood.
Okay.
All these songwriters would get together and present their stuff, and I had written a piece for vibraphone called Jules, and from that job, somebody heard me play, and they said, "Hey, so and so is looking for a percussionist that has to play mallet instruments." So I took all my stuff up off of Hollywood Boulevard. It was Waylon's house. I didn't know that at the time, and I come in and they have this overture that they're going to play before the puppet comes out. And anybody that knows overtures for cartoon music knows it's very difficult two mallet stuff. And I thought I had pretty much butchered the audition. And they came down, and later on they said, "Well, can you do this gig? And I said, well, sure. The gig was at Studio One. It was taped live of all the puppets. He had a number of different puppets. And my job was just playing all the auxiliary percussion. And the drummer's job was primarily to get the pratfalls, and when the puppet would do something, you had to make a crash, rum pumps, and stuff like that. So we rehearsed one night, got all things together. He's going to make a presentation the next 2 nights, and the drummer didn't show up. And now everybody's panicked because this is the night that all the agents are coming in town and everything. And so they're calling, trying to find a drummer. And I said, Waylon, I played the drums long before I played xylophone. I can do this. And in LA, you sort of got pigeonholed. Like if you could do one thing really well, they couldn't believe you could do anything else. You'd be like, that's just kind of how it was. So I convinced him to let me do it. And I did it, and everything went fine. I could play the show. The show was not hard, and I did all the pratfalls and everything. Next night, I go back to percussion. Drummer shows up. End of story. So Waylon's very nice. He comes out. He said, I want to thank you for all your help. It was great. He said, we're booked in Reno. For now, I'll probably end up in Tahoe and Vegas. I can't take you with me because I only have enough money for a drummer. I said, okay, that's fine. So they get up there. Second night, third night of the gig, drummer disappears.
Yeah.
I have no idea where this drummer is. And so Waylon calls me up. Waylon never, ever called me up. He calls me up on the phone. He used to call me Mr. David. He goes, Mr. David, I need your help. I said, well, what's going on? He said, I got to get rid of my drummer. My drummer has a real bad habit. And I said, when do you need me? He said, I need you tonight. And I lived about a couple miles from Hollywood Burbank Airport. And so I was able to get everything together. The drums were up there, and I flew up, and I did the gig. And at the end of the night, he offered me the job. And I had that job for off and on for 15 years or so.
Yeah, and just touring wherever he wanted.
Primarily in those days, it was, it was the casinos.
Okay.
And it was a really nice. It was a great job. They would, you got picked up by a town car. If you played Caesars, you stayed at Caesars. I mean, I was able to develop a really terrible taste for buffet food. I hated it. All ended up tasting the same after years and years of eating it. But yeah, it was a great gig. It really kept me alive.
So how'd you get to the East Coast?
How to come back? So I got married and we had a child, and I found out that, children are not like automobiles, where automobiles can go in and get oil changes whenever you have the money to do it. Kids have to go to the doctor when they're infants and so forth and so on. So we needed health care. And so I started applying at all different colleges and schools in Baltimore County, offered me a job. And so that was 88. We came back here in 88, and I was with Baltimore County for 5 years, Howard County for 13 years.
And these are what, high schools, middle schools?
Yeah, it was middle school. It was middle school in Baltimore and Howard County. And then when I left Howard County and retired, I got the job at Gonzaga, which is high school down in D.C. So if you look at it, I kind of taught just about every level. I did some elementary teaching, not a lot, but a little bit.
Yeah. What do you prefer?
Oh, goodness. I just like to teach. I mean,
Yeah.
that's I've been lucky enough to be able to do that and still enjoy it. I still don't feel like I'm working.
Yeah.
When I do that, but I don't think I have a preference. I did when I first got interviewed in Howard County. Great principal, a guy named Jesse Smith, wonderful man. The last part of the interview was a question. He said, "Now I'm going to give you a multiple choice question." Okay. He said, "How would you describe your average middle school student?" Always energetic, always depressed, running constantly, crying constantly. And the answer to the question was, it's all the above. And that's what I said. And he gave me the job. And it was pretty accurate. I mean, you run into middle schoolers, they can do anything at any given time, depending on the grade. I mean, I remember I had a really tough eighth grade class in Baltimore County, and one day they rotated the schedule, and I didn't really know my kids very well at that point, and I started treating the sixth graders like I was treating the eighth graders, and they were crying
Yeah.
because you had to be really stern with the eighth graders, and the sixth graders they're just pups, you know.
So, what got you interested in percussion in the first place?
Well, I grew up in a household where my dad was a drummer. Um, and you always hear about, and you may have heard this yourself. Come home and tell your parents you want to be a musician, and they they start screaming and yelling and, you know, anything but that, anything. Go rob banks. We don't care anything. Just don't be a musician. And in my household, that's what people did. My brother was a violinist. He went to Curtis Institute of Music. So, when I told my parents that, you know, that's what I wanted to do, it was like, oh, yeah, cool. Yeah, of course. Of course, that's what you're going to do. Um, and it got real interesting because I graduated from high school in 67. And I wasn't thinking about a whole lot in 1967 other than the next gig and the next attractive woman that I could see and so forth and so on. Um, and so my brother, who was very smart, intellect forever, I didn't get any of that. He got all of it. And he came over and he explained this whole thing to him. He says, well, what are you going to do? And I said, oh, I don't know. I'm not sure. He said, well, you've got to figure out what you're going to do because if you don't go to school, you're going to go into the draft and you're going to get to go overseas and kill people that you don't know. That would be the Vietnam War. Yeah. And so, I mean, that was a shock. I mean, I don't want to go kill people. I have a hard time getting up in the morning. I mean, it's crazy. So I applied to University of Maryland, which in those days you needed like a valid fishing license to get into the University of Maryland. Now it's like you have like a 4 something to get in, and then you don't get in. And I also applied at Montgomery, which at the time was junior college, because the idea was if I didn't get into Maryland, I would more than likely get into the junior college. And I needed that because I think when I left high school, I think my cumulative average was a 1.6.
Pretty good.
Yeah. And what was funny is this lady in front of me, who was my counselor, who was looking at all the stuff she had in front of her, and she never once talked about any of the music. It's like I had all this music. She didn't talk about it. So she says to me, well, Dave, I think you're going to be suited probably best in life for manual labor. And I ended up being a drummer. So she wasn't that far off, really. I mean, it was pretty close. Yeah. So, with a 1.6, you couldn't even get into Maryland. I mean, maybe Maryland wouldn't take you. So I had to take a pre-college summer session. And you had to make a 2.0. And I took government politics and I took English. And the freshman English was a course that they used to weed out anybody they really didn't want. It's kind of like if you can't pass freshman English, you're worthless. We don't want any part of you at all. So my brother steps in and he goes, how are your grades? And I go, government politics is pretty okay, which meant I had a C. And I was failing freshman English. And he goes, so you need to go to the teacher, freshman English, and do anything. If she wants lunch, bring her lunch. If you want anything she wants you to do, you tell her that you have to get at least a D in this class. So I did. And so she had me coming at all different times of the day and everything, and I still wasn't a very good writer. And I went to the government politics teacher, and he said, you're doing pretty well in here. You're probably gonna pass it. So in the meantime, Montgomery Junior College sends me a little note saying, hey, by the way, we see that you've applied to the University of Maryland. Well, unless you withdraw from Maryland by this, whatever the date was, where there's no record of you ever wanting to go to school there, then if you can't get into Maryland, we're not going to take you either.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Pressure's on.
Yeah, pressure was really on. So I I got a B in government politics. I got a D in freshman English. I got a 2.0. And so University of Maryland opened its doors for me. And I go in, and the very first thing, since we were at-risk students, because I was part of the pre-college summer session, I'm now in front of another guidance counselor. This woman is sitting there with all these papers in front. I'm going, oh, here we go. I've been through this before. I know what this is about. And she's looked through all the papers and she goes, okay, so yeah, 1.6, not real good. Now, I see you were in orchestra, yeah. You were in band, yeah. You were in marching band, yeah. What does your father do for a living? Your parents? I said, he's a musician, And she goes, do you play? I said, yeah, I do play. And she says, do you play professionally? And I said, I don't know what that means. And she said, it means, do people pay you to go out and play your drums? And I said, yeah. And she slams this folder shut. I mean, it was physically, you could just hear it. And I thought, I'm going to get thrown out. That's what happened last time. And she says, you're going to go over to the University of Maryland, the Fine Arts Department, and you're going to register. You're going to be a music major. And I never thought about that because I thought, well, I already know how to do that. Why would I want to major in that,
Yeah.
And so I actually was there for 5 years because if you wanted to play music in a state school, you had to take all these other classes to meet the state requirements. And then I think I had a junior recital coming up and I was in biology. No, it was a botany. And I was drawing cells of chloroplasts or something. And I was thinking, man, the second movement is just not good, of this tanner. And I couldn't even focus on the cells. I was thinking, I need to go practice. So I went in, and I think that year, I took like 19 units or something, something crazy. And I went to my advisor and I said, I can't do this for 4 years. I said, I have to go 5 years. And he says, well, David, we're finding that the people that go for 5 years, they don't finish. And I said, well, I can guarantee you if I go through this again with this 19 units, I said, I know I won't finish. So we stretched it out to 5 years and I got out of there,
Yeah. What degree particularly?
It was a Bachelor of Science in Music Education, basically. And then when I got to LA, I got my master's. I was really fortunate because I got my master's at Cal State Los Angeles. And at the time, Mitchell Peters was there. And I got a couple years of Mitchell Peters, who was wonderful, just a wonderful man, terrific player. And he was principal of the LA Philharmonic in those days. And if you signed up through Cal State Los Angeles, I mean, I think I got him for like $70 for like 10 lessons.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And if you study with him privately, I think he was charging like 70 a lesson or something, in those days. Great, great man. All the people I studied with were all Eastman grads. I studied with Ron Barnett at Maryland. I studied with Tony Ames, and I studied with Mitch, and I studied with Alan Dawson one summer session at Berkeley.